The grand ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and golden decorations. It was the wedding of Marcus Thornton, son of one of the wealthiest families in the city. Everyone who was anyone had been invited. The guest list read like a directory of the rich and famous. Women wore designer gowns that cost more than most people earned in a year. Men adjusted their expensive cufflinks and discussed business deals between sips of champagne. Among all this luxury, a young woman named Sarah moved quietly through the crowd. She wore a simple black vest and white shirt, the standard uniform of the catering staff. In her hands, she balanced a silver tray filled with delicate hors d'oeuvres. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she kept her eyes down as she worked. This was just another shift for her, another way to pay the bills while she pursued her real passion. Sarah had been working as a waitress for 3 years now. She took jobs at weddings, corporate events, and fancy parties. The pay was decent and the hours were flexible. But every dollar she earned went toward the same goal. She was saving for music school, hoping one day to study piano performance at a prestigious conservatory. Music was everything to her, but dreams required money and money required work. As she moved through the reception hall, she could hear snippets of conversation. People talked about their latest vacations to exotic islands, their new sports cars, and their investment portfolios. Nobody noticed the staff except when they wanted something. Sarah had learned long ago to become invisible at these events. It was easier that way. The wedding ceremony had been beautiful. The bride, a stunning woman named Victoria, had walked down the aisle in a dress that probably cost $50,000. The groom had looked handsome in his custom-tailored suit. They had exchanged vows under an arch of white roses and promised to love each other forever. Now, hours later, the reception was in full swing. Near the center of the ballroom stood a magnificent grand piano. It was a Steinway, probably worth more than $100,000. The polished black surface reflected the lights from the chandeliers above. It sat there like a piece of art, untouched and perfect. Sarah had noticed it the moment she entered the hall. Her fingers had itched to play it, but of course that was impossible. The piano was just decoration, a symbol of wealth and culture. A live band played on a stage at the far end of the room. They performed popular songs and classic standards. Couples danced on the marble floor, laughing and celebrating. The music was good, professional, but Sarah barely heard it. She was focused on her work, moving from table to table, offering food and clearing empty plates. As the evening wore on, some of the guests had clearly had too much to drink. Their voices grew louder, their laughter more reckless. Sarah noticed a group of young men near the bar, all dressed in expensive suits. They were friends of the groom, probably college buddies or business associates. One of them was particularly loud. His name was Derek Hammond, and he came from old money. His family owned a chain of luxury hotels. Derek had the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. He was handsome in a conventional way, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that showed too many teeth. He laughed too loud at his own jokes and spoke to the staff like they were servants in his personal kingdom. Sarah had encountered men like him before at these events. They were all the same, thinking their wealth made them superior to everyone else. She was passing near their table when Derek suddenly grabbed her arm. His grip was firm, stopping her in her tracks. Sarah turned, keeping her expression neutral and professional. "Hey, you," Derek said, his words slightly slurred. "What's your name?" "Sarah, sir," she replied quietly. "Sarah," he repeated, grinning at his friends. "Tell me something, Sarah. Do you play piano?" The question caught her off guard. She hesitated, unsure where this was going. "I do, sir, but I'm working right now." Derek's grin widened. He gestured dramatically toward the Steinway. "You see that beautiful piano over there? It's just sitting there doing nothing. Seems like a waste, doesn't it?" His friends laughed, sensing some kind of entertainment coming. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She didn't like the tone in his voice. "The band is playing, sir," she said carefully. "I'm sure the piano will be used later." "Later?" Derek stood up, swaying slightly. No. I want to hear it now. I want you to play it now." Sarah shook her head politely. "I really can't, sir. I'm working and I don't think the hosts would appreciate—" "Oh, come on," Derek interrupted. He turned to his friends, speaking loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "She says she plays piano, but I bet she's lying. I bet she doesn't know a single note." Heat rose to Sarah's cheeks. A few other guests had turned to watch the scene unfolding. She felt their eyes on her, judging, curious. This was exactly the kind of attention she had tried to avoid all evening. "I'm not lying, sir," she said firmly. "But I'm here to work, not to perform." Derek laughed, a mean sound that echoed through the nearby area. Look at her, pretending to be some kind of pianist. A waitress who thinks she's an artist. That's rich. One of his friends joined in. Maybe she plays chopsticks. That counts, right? More laughter. Sarah felt her face burning. She wanted to walk away, to ignore them and return to her duties. But something in Derek's mocking tone struck a nerve. She had spent years studying music, practicing for hours every single day. She had sacrificed so much for her passion, and now this privileged man who had probably never worked hard for anything in his life was mocking her. "I can play," she said, her voice stronger now. "I've been playing since I was 5 years old." Derek raised his eyebrows in exaggerated surprise. "Oh, really? Well then, prove it. Go over there and play something for us. Unless you're scared." The challenge hung in the air. More guests were watching now, their conversations pausing. Sarah glanced toward her supervisor, a stern woman named Mrs. Chen, who was watching from across the room with a disapproving frown. Playing the piano would definitely get her in trouble. But walking away would mean letting Derek's mockery stand unchallenged. She looked at the Steinway, sitting there perfect and untouched. Her fingers trembled slightly. It had been weeks since she had played a real grand piano. She usually practiced on a cheap keyboard in her tiny apartment. "Fine," she heard herself say. "I'll play." Derek's face lit up with triumph. He waved his hand dramatically, gesturing for Sarah to proceed to the piano. His friends whistled and clapped, treating the whole thing like a circus act. Sarah set down her serving tray on a nearby table, her heart pounding. She walked across the marble floor, each step feeling heavier than the last. The eyes of dozens of wealthy guests followed her movement. Mrs. Chen, her supervisor, was making her way through the crowd. Sarah could see the anger on her face. This was going to cost her the job, she knew it. But something inside her refused to back down now. Let them see what a waitress could do. Let them understand that talent wasn't something you could buy with money. She reached the piano and stood beside it for a moment. The Steinway was even more beautiful up close. The keys gleamed white and black, perfectly maintained. She could see her reflection in the polished surface. Taking a deep breath, she sat down on the bench and adjusted her position. The murmur of conversation in the ballroom had quieted. People were curious now, wondering what would happen next. Derek called out from his table, "Play something classical." "Show us what you've got, waitress." Sarah placed her hands on the keys. They felt cool and smooth under her fingers. She closed her eyes for a moment, blocking out the crowd, the pressure, the embarrassment. In that brief silence, she remembered why she loved music. It wasn't about showing off or proving anything to anyone. It was about the pure joy of creating something beautiful. She began to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The first notes drifted through the ballroom, soft and delicate. The melody was like a whisper, intimate and emotional. Sarah's fingers moved across the keys with practiced grace. Years of training guided every movement. She knew this piece by heart, had played it 1,000 times in her tiny apartment, dreaming of the day she could perform it on a real stage. As she played, something magical happened. The conversation stopped completely. The band on stage had paused, watching this unexpected performance. Guests turned in their chairs, drinks forgotten in their hands. The music filled the grand ballroom, each note crystal clear and perfectly controlled. Sarah's eyes remained closed. She was lost in the music now, forgetting the mocking guests, the expensive dresses, the judgment in the room. The Nocturne was a challenging piece, requiring both technical skill and emotional depth. Sarah poured everything into it. Her fingers flew over the keys during the faster passages, then slowed to a gentle touch for the tender moments. The dynamics shifted from powerful crescendos to barely audible whispers. Every phrase was shaped with care, every transition smooth and natural. Derek had stopped laughing. His smug expression had faded, replaced by something like confusion. His friends were silent, staring at the piano. Around the room, faces showed surprise and wonder. This was not what they had expected. They had anticipated an embarrassing performance, maybe a few clumsy notes, something to laugh about later. Instead, they were witnessing real artistry. Sarah continued playing, her body swaying slightly with the music's rhythm. The Nocturne's middle section arrived, more passionate and intense. Her hands stretched across the keyboard, finding complex chords that resonated through the expensive sound system of the ballroom. The Steinway responded beautifully to her touch, its rich tone filling every corner of the space. In the back of the room, an elderly man stood up from his table. His name was Richard Pemberton, and he was a renowned music professor at the city's most prestigious conservatory. He had taught piano for 40 years and had heard thousands of students play. He moved closer to the piano, his experienced ear analyzing every note. His expression showed genuine interest. The bride, Victoria, had been chatting with guests at the head table. She stopped mid-sentence when she heard the music. There was something in Sarah's playing that touched her. The emotion was real, not performed or artificial. It spoke of someone who truly understood the language of music. Sarah moved into the final section of the nocturne. The melody returned, softer now, like a memory fading into the distance. Her touch on the keys was feather-light. Each note hung in the air for a perfect moment before the next one arrived. The ending approached. Those final delicate phrases that Chopin had crafted so beautifully. Sarah played them with reverence, honoring the composer's intention. The last note faded into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. The entire ballroom held its breath. Sarah opened her eyes and looked down at her hands, still resting on the keys. She had done it. Despite the pressure, despite the mockery, she had played perfectly. Then the applause began. It started with Richard Pemberton, who clapped loudly from his position near the piano. Others joined in quickly. The sound grew until the entire ballroom was filled with applause. People stood from their tables, giving Sarah a standing ovation. Guests who had ignored her all evening were now looking at her with respect and admiration. Sarah stood up from the piano bench, feeling dazed. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. She was just a waitress, and these people were celebrating her like she was a professional performer. Her legs felt weak as she turned to face the crowd. Victoria, the bride, was walking toward her. She wore a huge smile on her face. When she reached Sarah, she took both of her hands. "That was absolutely beautiful," Victoria said warmly. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Sarah's voice came out shaky. "I've been studying music since I was a child. I'm saving money to attend conservatory." "Which conservatory?" a voice asked. It was Richard Pemberton who had joined them at the piano. His eyes were sharp and intelligent behind wire-rimmed glasses. "The Hamilton Conservatory," Sarah admitted. "But it's very expensive, and I still need another year of saving before I can afford the tuition." Professor Pemberton studied her carefully. "You played that nocturne with remarkable maturity. The technical execution was flawless, but more importantly, you understood the emotional content. That's rare, especially in someone so young." Before Sarah could respond, Mrs. Chen appeared at her elbow. Her supervisor's face was red with anger. "Sarah, what do you think you're doing? You're supposed to be serving, not playing piano. This is completely inappropriate." "You're fired!" The words hit Sarah like cold water. Reality came crashing back. Of course she was fired. She had abandoned her duties to play piano at a private event. No matter how well she had played, no matter the applause, she had crossed a line. Her source of income, the money she needed for her dreams, was gone. Victoria quickly intervened. "Wait, please. This is my wedding, and I say she did nothing wrong. In fact, she made this evening more special than I could have imagined." Mrs. Chen looked uncertain. She couldn't argue with the bride at her own wedding, but her expression remained stern. "That may be, but there are rules. The catering staff cannot simply—" "I'll handle this," Marcus, the groom, said as he approached. He had been talking with guests but had stopped to listen to Sarah's performance. "What's your name?" he asked Sarah directly. "Sarah Mitchell, sir." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. He exchanged a glance with his new wife, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then he turned back to Sarah. "You made our wedding memorable. That's worth more than following rules. I don't want to hear any more talk of firing." Mrs. Chen's mouth pressed into a thin line, but she nodded and walked away, defeated. Sarah felt relief flood through her, but also confusion. Why were these wealthy strangers defending her? Derek remained at his table, his face now pale and tight with embarrassment. His friends had gone quiet, no longer finding the situation amusing. The man who had mocked Sarah just minutes ago now looked like he wanted to disappear. Several guests nearby were whispering and glancing in his direction. Some faces showed disapproval. Derek had tried to humiliate a waitress, only to have her demonstrate extraordinary talent. He had made himself look foolish in front of the city's elite. Professor Pemberton pulled out a business card from his jacket pocket, and handed it to Sarah. "I want you to come see me at the conservatory next week. Don't worry about the tuition right now. Just come talk to me. I believe we can work something out." Sarah stared at the card in disbelief. The Hamilton Conservatory was her dream school, and here was one of its most respected professors offering her a chance. Her hands trembled as she held the small piece of cardstock. "I don't understand. Why would you help me?" The professor smiled kindly. "Because talent like yours shouldn't be wasted serving drinks at parties. I've taught for 40 years, and I know real passion when I hear it. You have something special, Miss Mitchell. It would be a crime not to nurture it." Victoria touched Sarah's arm gently. "I need to get back to my guests, but please don't leave yet. I want to talk to you more later." The bride squeezed her hand before returning to her husband's side. Sarah stood alone by the piano, overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. 10 minutes ago, she had been an invisible waitress. Now she held a business card that could change her entire life. The other staff members were staring at her, some with envy, others with amazement. Mrs. Chen watched from across the room, her expression unreadable. An older woman approached Sarah. She wore an elegant navy dress and diamond earrings that caught the light. Her silver hair was styled perfectly. "That was quite a performance, dear. I'm Margaret Chen, Mrs. Chen's mother, actually. I own the catering company." Sarah's heart sank. This was it. The owner herself was going to fire her. She prepared herself for the inevitable, but Margaret smiled warmly. "Don't look so worried. I'm not here to scold you. In fact, I wanted to tell you that what you did took courage. My daughter runs a tight ship, and rules are important in this business. But sometimes special circumstances call for breaking the rules. You represented our company beautifully tonight, just not in the way we expected. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Chen, I shouldn't have stopped working. I just couldn't let that man." Margaret held up her hand. "Derek Hammond is a spoiled brat. Everyone knows it, though most people are too polite to say so. He needed to be put in his place, and you did it with grace and talent. That said, you can't work the rest of tonight's event. It would be too awkward now. But you're not fired. Come to my office on Monday. We'll discuss your situation." After Margaret walked away, Sarah realized she was free to leave. She went to the staff area and retrieved her coat and bag. As she changed out of her uniform, she kept touching Professor Pemberton's business card in her pocket, making sure it was real. When she emerged from the staff area, she found Derek standing near the exit. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. When he saw Sarah, he stepped forward awkwardly. "Look," he started, not meeting her eyes. "I was out of line earlier. I had too much to drink, and I said some things I shouldn't have." Sarah waited, saying nothing. She wasn't going to make this easy for him. Derek continued, "You're obviously talented. I didn't know. I just thought, I didn't think—" "You didn't think a waitress could be an artist?" Sarah finished for him. "You assumed that because I serve food I must not have any other value or ability. That's the problem, Mr. Hammond. You judge people based on what job they do or how much money they have." He flinched at her words. "You're right. I'm sorry. Truly sorry." Sarah studied him for a moment. The apology seemed genuine, though it clearly pained him to give it. "Thank you for apologizing," she said simply, then walked past him toward the exit. Outside the venue, the night air was cool and refreshing. Sarah stood on the steps, looking up at the stars. The sounds of the party continued inside, muffled through the walls. She pulled out her phone and called her roommate, Lisa. "Hey, you're done early," Lisa answered. "You won't believe what just happened," Sarah said, and proceeded to tell the whole incredible story. Lisa screamed so loud that Sarah had to hold the phone away from her ear. "Oh my God, Sarah! This is amazing. A professor from Hamilton? That's your dream school. I know. I still can't believe it's real. What if I go to his office and he's changed his mind? What if tonight was just some fluke and I can't play that well again?" "Stop it," Lisa said firmly. "You're an incredible pianist. You play beautifully every single day in our tiny apartment on that cheap keyboard. Imagine what you could do with proper training and a real piano. This is your chance, Sarah. Don't second guess it." Sarah smiled, feeling tears prick her eyes. Lisa was right. This was her chance, and she couldn't let fear hold her back. She took a taxi home, watching the city lights blur past the window. The apartment she shared with Lisa was in a less expensive part of town. It was small, just 2 bedrooms and a cramped living room, but it was home. When she walked in, Lisa was waiting with a bottle of cheap champagne they had been saving for a special occasion. "This definitely counts as special," Lisa declared, popping the cork. They toasted to dreams coming true, to talent being recognized, and to putting arrogant rich people in their place. That night, Sarah lay in bed unable to sleep. Her mind kept replaying the evening over and over. The feel of the Steinway's keys under her fingers. The sound of Chopin filling the grand ballroom. The look on Derek's face when he realized he had misjudged her completely. The professor's business card sat on her nightstand, catching the moonlight from the window. She thought about all the years of practice, the sacrifices she had made. While her friends from high school had gone to parties and enjoyed their youth, Sarah had spent hours at the piano. While other college students relaxed on weekends, she worked events and practiced music. There had been so many moments when she wondered if it was worth it, if her dreams were just foolish fantasies. But tonight had proven something important. Her talent was real. It wasn't just her own opinion or her mother's biased praise. Professional musicians and educated people had recognized her ability. Professor Pemberton, who had heard countless students, thought she was special. Sarah reached over and picked up the business card, reading it again in the dim light. Richard Pemberton, head of piano studies, Hamilton Conservatory of Music. Below that was a phone number and email address. She would call on Monday. No more doubts, no more fears. This opportunity was too precious to waste. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah dreamed of concert halls and grand pianos, of audiences applauding her performances. But mixed in with those dreams were images of Derek's mocking face, a reminder of how close she had come to walking away, to letting his cruelty silence her voice. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and light rain. Sarah dressed carefully for her meeting at the Hamilton Conservatory, choosing a simple but professional outfit. Her stomach churned with nervous energy as she rode the bus across town. The conservatory was located in an older part of the city, housed in a historic building with tall columns and arched windows. It looked like something from a European postcard. Inside, the halls echoed with the sounds of music. A violin sang from one practice room. A soprano voice trilled scales from another. Piano notes cascaded from somewhere above. Sarah breathed it all in, feeling like she had stepped into another world. This was where real musicians trained, where serious artists dedicated their lives to their craft. Professor Pemberton's office was on the 3rd floor. Sarah knocked on the heavy wooden door, her heart hammering. "Come in," called a voice. She entered a room lined with bookshelves and framed concert posters. A grand piano stood in one corner, its surface covered with sheet music. Professor Pemberton sat behind a large desk, reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Miss Mitchell, I'm glad you came. Please sit down." Sarah sat in a leather chair facing the desk. Her hands gripped her purse tightly. The professor removed his glasses and leaned back in his chair. "I've been thinking about your performance Saturday night. It showed remarkable maturity and technical control. Tell me about your training. Who have you studied with?" Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "I've never had formal training at a conservatory level. My first teacher was Mrs. Rodriguez in my neighborhood. She taught me from age 5 until I was 13. Then I studied with Mr. Chen at the community college for 3 years. Since then, I've been teaching myself using online resources and books." Professor Pemberton's eyebrows rose. "You're largely self-taught? That makes your performance even more impressive. Most students who play Chopin that well have had intensive training since childhood." "I practice every day," Sarah said. "Sometimes 4 or 5 hours when I'm not working. I use a keyboard in my apartment because I can't afford a real piano." The professor nodded slowly, processing this information. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the rainy courtyard below. "The conservatory is expensive, as you know. Full tuition is $60,000 per year. That doesn't include housing, books, or other expenses." Sarah's hope deflated like a punctured balloon. She had known the cost, but hearing it stated so bluntly made it seem impossible. Even with her savings, she couldn't afford even 1 semester. Professor Pemberton turned back to face her. "However, we have scholarship programs. Full scholarships for exceptionally talented students who demonstrate both skill and dedication. These scholarships cover tuition, fees, and provide a small living stipend." Sarah's breath caught. "I didn't know that was possible. It's highly competitive. We only award 3 or 4 full scholarships each year." But based on what I heard Saturday night, I believe you could be a strong candidate. He returned to his desk and pulled out a folder. Here's what would need to happen. You would need to audition for the scholarship committee. That means preparing 3 pieces from different musical periods. You would also need letters of recommendation, transcripts from any previous music education, and an essay explaining your musical goals. Sarah's mind raced. 3 pieces. She could do that. She had been practicing constantly for years. But letters of recommendation from whom? Mr. Chen from the community college might help, but that was years ago. And transcripts, essays, all while working to pay rent. When would the audition be? She asked. Scholarship auditions are held twice a year. The next round is in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. That wasn't much time, but it was possible. Sarah felt determination rising in her chest. I want to try. I'll prepare the best audition I can. Professor Pemberton smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. I can't guarantee you'll win the scholarship, but I can help you prepare. I'm willing to give you lessons between now and the audition. Normally, I only teach enrolled students, but I'll make an exception in your case. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. Private lessons with one of the most respected piano professors in the city? This was beyond anything she had imagined. Professor, I can't afford to pay you for lessons. He waved his hand dismissively. I'm not asking for payment. Consider it an investment in talent. If you win the scholarship and study here, you'll be representing the conservatory and my teaching. That's payment enough. They spent the next hour discussing repertoire choices. Professor Pemberton suggested a Bach prelude and fugue for the Baroque period, a Beethoven sonata for the classical period, and a Rachmaninoff piece for the Romantic period. All were challenging works that would showcase different aspects of Sarah's playing. When Sarah finally left the conservatory, the rain had stopped. Puddles reflected the gray sky. She walked to the bus stop feeling lighter than air. This was really happening. She had a chance at a full scholarship, at studying music seriously, at pursuing her dreams. But reality set in quickly. She still needed to work to pay her rent and bills. Margaret Chen, the catering company owner, had asked her to come to the office. Sarah took the bus directly there from the conservatory. Margaret's office was in a small building near the downtown area. Unlike the grandeur of the conservatory, this was a practical workspace with filing cabinets and delivery schedules pinned to the walls. Margaret greeted Sarah warmly and invited her to sit. I've been thinking about your situation, Margaret began. You're a good worker. Reliable, punctual professional. The incident at the wedding was unusual, but as I said, I understand why it happened. However, I have a proposition for you. Sarah listened intently. My company caters many events for wealthy clients. These people appreciate culture and sophistication. What if instead of just serving food, you also provided musical entertainment? We could market it as an added service. Live piano music during cocktail hours or dinner. You would still help with setup and coordination, but you'd also perform. I can pay you more per event. It was a clever idea. Sarah would earn more money while also getting performance experience. That sounds wonderful, Mrs. Chen. But I would need time to practice. I have an important audition in 6 weeks. Margaret nodded. We can work around that. I'll schedule you for fewer events so you have practice time. This could benefit both of us. You get money and performance experience. My company gets a unique selling point. They shook hands on the arrangement. Sarah left the office feeling like her life was finally coming together. She had a path forward, people who believed in her and opportunities she had never imagined. Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into preparation. She practiced on her keyboard for hours each morning before work. She researched the pieces Professor Pemberton had suggested, watching performances online and studying the scores. Every free moment was dedicated to music. Her first lesson with Professor Pemberton was intimidating. He was kind but demanding, pointing out technical flaws she hadn't noticed and pushing her to deeper interpretations. They worked on the Bach first, breaking down the complex counterpoint and ensuring each voice was clear and distinct. You have good instincts, he told her during one session. But you've developed some bad habits from self-teaching. We need to correct your hand position and improve your use of the pedal. These small changes will make a big difference. Sarah worked harder than she had ever worked in her life. Between lessons, practice sessions, and catering events, she barely had time to sleep. Her hands developed calluses. Her shoulders ached from hours at the keyboard. But she could hear the improvement in her playing. The pieces were coming together, sounding more polished and professional with each passing day. Lisa watched Sarah's transformation with a mixture of pride and concern. "You need to rest sometimes," she said one evening, finding Sarah still practicing at midnight. "You're going to burn yourself out." "I can't rest," Sarah replied, her fingers continuing to move over the keys. "This audition is too important. It's my only chance." "It won't help if you're exhausted and stressed during the audition. Your body needs sleep. Your mind needs a break." Reluctantly, Sarah had to admit Lisa was right. She started forcing herself to take 1 day off per week, using that time to rest and recharge. It was difficult at first. She felt guilty every moment she wasn't practicing. But she noticed that when she returned to the piano after a day off, her playing was actually better. Her mind was clearer, her fingers more responsive. Margaret Chen's new business model was working well. Sarah performed at 3 events in the first 2 weeks. At a corporate dinner, she played light jazz standards while executives discussed business. At an anniversary party, she provided romantic background music as guests danced. At a charity fundraiser, she performed classical pieces that impressed the donors. The extra income helped ease her financial stress. But more importantly, the performances gave her confidence. She was learning to play in front of audiences, to handle the pressure of live performance. Each event was like a mini audition, preparing her for the real thing. 4 weeks before the audition, something unexpected happened. Sarah arrived at the conservatory for her weekly lesson with Professor Pemberton and found Victoria, the bride from the wedding, waiting in the hallway. "Sarah." Victoria rushed over and hugged her like they were old friends. "I'm so glad I caught you. I've been trying to find a way to contact you." Sarah was surprised and confused. "Victoria, what are you doing here?" "I came to find Professor Pemberton, actually. I wanted to ask him about you. Marcus and I have been talking about your situation and we want to help." Professor Pemberton emerged from his office just then, greeting Victoria warmly. It turned out that Victoria's family had donated significantly to the conservatory over the years. She was on the board of trustees. Inside the professor's office, Victoria explained her purpose. "Sarah made our wedding unforgettable, not just because of her beautiful playing, but because she showed such courage and grace under pressure. Marcus and I feel terrible that she's been struggling financially to pursue her education. We want to establish a scholarship in her name." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. "A scholarship in my name? But why would you do that?" Victoria smiled. "Because talent shouldn't be limited by money. Because you reminded us that sometimes the most remarkable people are the ones we overlook. And honestly, because putting Derek in his place was worth its weight in gold. That man needed to learn some humility." Professor Pemberton looked thoughtful. "A name scholarship is a generous gesture. However, Sarah still needs to go through the audition process. I can't simply admit her without the proper procedure. It wouldn't be fair to other candidates and it wouldn't serve Sarah's development as a musician." "Of course," Victoria agreed. "We're not trying to buy her admission, but if she wins a scholarship through the audition, we want to provide additional funding, money for a better living situation, a real piano to practice on, maybe some summer programs or master classes, things that will help her succeed once she's enrolled." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. She hadn't cried when Derek mocked her, hadn't cried during the hardest practice sessions, but this kindness overwhelmed her completely. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much," Victoria hugged her again. "Just play beautifully at your audition. That's all the thanks we need." After Victoria left, Sarah and Professor Pemberton continued with the lesson. But Sarah's mind was spinning. People believed in her, not just her roommate or her old teachers, but successful, influential people who barely knew her. The weight of their expectations felt heavy, but also motivating. She couldn't let them down. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of practice and performance. Sarah's technique improved dramatically under Professor Pemberton's guidance. The Bach was crisp and clear, each voice balanced perfectly. The Beethoven had power and expression, revealing the drama in the music. The Rachmaninoff was her biggest challenge, requiring both technical prowess and emotional depth, but she was making progress. 3 days before the audition, disaster struck. Sarah was performing at a corporate event, playing during a cocktail reception. She reached for a challenging passage in a Gershwin piece and suddenly felt a sharp pain in her right wrist. She managed to finish the performance, but afterward her wrist throbbed and ached. By the time she got home, it was swollen and painful to move. Lisa insisted they go to the emergency room. The doctor examined Sarah's wrist and delivered bad news. "You've strained the tendons. It's not serious, but you need to rest it completely for at least a week. No piano playing, no repetitive motions. I can't rest it, Sarah protested. I have an audition in 3 days. The most important audition of my life. The doctor shook his head firmly. If you play on it now, you'll make it worse. You could develop chronic problems that would end your piano career before it starts. You need to rest. Sarah left the hospital wearing a wrist brace, feeling like her world was collapsing. She had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and now her own body was betraying her. She called Professor Pemberton from the taxi, crying as she explained the situation. This is serious, he said gravely. You need to follow the doctor's orders. However, the audition committee might allow you to postpone. I'll speak with them tomorrow. That night, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her wrist throbbed despite the pain medication. But worse than the physical pain was the emotional agony. What if they wouldn't let her postpone? What if she had to wait another 6 months for the next audition round? She could barely afford to keep going as things were, and Victoria and Marcus had shown such faith in her. They had created a scholarship opportunity. How could she face them if she failed? Lisa sat with her through the night, offering comfort and encouragement. Your wrist will heal. This is just a temporary setback. You're still incredibly talented, and that won't change. But the timing is terrible, Sarah said miserably. Everything was coming together perfectly, and now this happens. Maybe it's a test, Lisa suggested. Life throws obstacles at us to see how badly we want something. The question is, are you going to give up, or are you going to find a way through this? Sarah looked at her friend, seeing the conviction in her eyes. Lisa was right. This was a setback, but it didn't have to be the end. She had overcome obstacles before. She had worked multiple jobs while practicing piano. She had taught herself advanced techniques without formal training. She had stood up to Derek's mockery and proved her worth. One injured wrist wasn't going to stop her now. I'm going to find a way, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. I don't know how yet, but I will. The next morning, Professor Pemberton called with news. The scholarship committee had agreed to a 1-week postponement of Sarah's audition. It wasn't ideal, but it gave her wrist more time to heal. The doctor had said complete rest for a week, which meant if everything went perfectly, she might be able to play at the rescheduled audition. Sarah spent those days in agony, not from pain, but from forced inactivity. She kept the brace on constantly and followed all the doctor's instructions. She iced her wrist, took anti-inflammatory medication, and did gentle stretching exercises. But she couldn't practice. She couldn't even touch the piano. All she could do was mentally rehearse her pieces, running through them in her mind over and over. Lisa helped by playing recordings of the pieces Sarah would perform. Sarah would sit with her eyes closed, fingers moving slightly in the air, imagining herself at the piano. It wasn't the same as actual practice, but it kept the music fresh in her mind. On the 4th day, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Derek Hammond appeared at her apartment door, looking uncomfortable and out of place in the modest building. Lisa answered the door and immediately tried to close it in his face. Wait, Derek said quickly. Please, I just want to talk to Sarah for a minute. I promise I'm not here to cause trouble. Sarah heard his voice and came to the door. She was curious about why he would come all this way to see her. It's okay, Lisa, let him in. Derek entered the small apartment, his expensive suit and watch standing out against the worn furniture and cheap decorations. He looked around and Sarah saw something like shame cross his face as he realized how she lived. I heard about your wrist, Derek began. Word gets around in our social circle. Victoria told my mother, who told me. Why do you care? Sarah asked, keeping her tone neutral. Derek sat down uninvited on the old couch. He looked at his hands for a long moment before speaking. After the wedding, I did a lot of thinking. The way I treated you that night, it wasn't just rude. It was cruel. I was showing off for my friends, trying to be funny, and I didn't care that I was humiliating another person. That's true, Sarah agreed. You didn't care. The thing is, Derek continued, I've been that person my whole life. The guy who thinks being rich means being better than everyone else. It took you playing that piano to make me realize how wrong I've been. You have a real gift, real talent that you've worked hard to develop. Meanwhile, I've never worked hard for anything in my life. Everything has been handed to me. Sarah sat down in a chair across from him, unsure where this was going. Why are you telling me this? Because I want to help, Derek said. I know that sounds crazy coming from me, but hear me out. My family has connections with the medical community. I've arranged for you to see a specialist, one of the best hand and wrist doctors in the country. He treats professional musicians and athletes. He can evaluate your injury and give you the best possible care. Sarah was skeptical. Why would you do that? Because I need to make amends. Because what I did was wrong, and I want to do something right for once. Derek pulled out a business card and handed it to her. The appointment is tomorrow if you want it. No strings attached, no payment required. I've already taken care of everything. After Derek left, Sarah and Lisa debated whether to trust him. It could be some kind of trick or manipulation. But ultimately, they decided Sarah had nothing to lose. Her wrist needed the best care possible if she was going to perform at the audition. The specialist, Dr. Morrison, examined Sarah's wrist thoroughly. He had her perform various movements and tests, studied the x-rays from the emergency room, and asked detailed questions about how the injury occurred and what kind of stress she put on her hands while playing piano. The good news is that there's no permanent damage, Dr. Morrison said. The strain is moderate, and with proper treatment, you should make a full recovery. However, trying to play piano in 3 days would be risky. The tendons need more time to heal. Sarah's heart sank. 3 days was all she had before the rescheduled audition. But Dr. Morrison wasn't finished. However, there are treatments we can do to speed up the healing process. Laser therapy, ultrasound, specialized massage techniques. I can't guarantee you'll be at full strength, but we can get you close. You'll need to come in every day for treatment, Sarah agreed immediately. For the next 3 days, she spent hours at Dr. Morrison's clinic. The treatments were intense but effective. She could feel her wrist getting stronger, the pain decreasing. By the morning of the audition, she could move her wrist almost normally. It still ached slightly, but it was manageable. Professor Pemberton met her outside the conservatory audition hall. He looked at her wrist, now free of its brace. How does it feel? Better, Sarah said. Not perfect, but good enough. I can do this. Remember everything we've worked on. Don't rush. Feel the music. And most importantly, believe in yourself. You belong here, Sarah. Show them why. The audition room was smaller than Sarah expected. 5 faculty members sat at a long table, their faces serious and professional. A beautiful Steinway grand piano waited in the center of the room. Sarah walked to the piano, her legs steady despite her nerves. She sat down and took a moment to center herself. Her wrist gave a small twinge of pain, but she pushed it from her mind. This was everything she had been working toward. All those years of practice, all the sacrifices, all the struggles led to this moment. Sarah began with the Bach. Her fingers found the keys, and the familiar notes flowed out. The counterpoint was clear and precise, each voice singing its own melody while harmonizing with the others. She focused completely on the music, forgetting the judging panel, forgetting her wrist, forgetting everything except the beauty of Bach's composition. When she finished the Bach, there was a brief pause before she moved to the Beethoven. This sonata was more dramatic, requiring power and emotion. Sarah poured herself into it. The first movement was stormy and intense. Her wrist protested slightly during the more demanding passages, but she pushed through. The second movement was tender and lyrical, giving her wrist a chance to rest. The final movement built to a triumphant conclusion. Finally, the Rachmaninoff. This was her biggest challenge, the piece that had worried her most. It required both technical brilliance and deep emotional expression. Sarah thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The mockery, the support, the injury, the determination. She channeled all of it into the music. The Rachmaninoff sang under her fingers. The lush romantic melodies filled the audition hall. Her wrist held up, though she could feel it tiring. During one particularly challenging passage, she felt a sharp pain, but she didn't falter. She adapted her technique slightly, protecting the injury while maintaining the musical integrity. When the final chord faded, Sarah lifted her hands from the keys. She had done it. Despite everything, she had performed all 3 pieces. Whether it was good enough for a scholarship, she didn't know. But she had given it everything she had, the panel members whispered among themselves. Then the woman in the center, Dean Patricia Walsh, spoke. Thank you, Miss Mitchell. That was a very impressive audition. We'll notify you of our decision within 1 week. Sarah stood, bowed slightly, and left the room. Her wrist was throbbing now, but she didn't care. She had made it through. In the hallway, Professor Pemberton was waiting. He gave her a small, knowing smile. Well done, was all he said. Outside the conservatory, Sarah found an unexpected crowd waiting. Lisa was there, bouncing excitedly. Victoria and Marcus stood nearby. Even Derek had come, keeping a respectful distance. Margaret Chen had closed her catering office for the afternoon to be there. They all wanted to know how it went. Sarah tried to describe the audition, but words felt inadequate. Lisa hugged her tightly. Victoria squeezed her hand. Even Derek offered a genuine smile and thumbs up. "Now we wait," Sarah said. 1 week. The week of waiting felt longer than all the weeks of preparation combined. Sarah tried to stay busy, but her mind constantly wandered to the audition. Had she played well enough? Had the panel noticed when her wrist hurt during the Rachmaninoff? Were there other candidates who had performed better? She returned to Dr. Morrison for follow-up appointments. Her wrist was healing well, though he cautioned her to continue being careful. No intense practice sessions until it was fully recovered. On the 5th day of waiting, Sarah was working a catering event when her phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something made her answer despite being in the middle of service. "Miss Mitchell, this is Dean Walsh from the Hamilton Conservatory. Do you have a moment to talk?" Sarah's heart stopped. She stepped away from the event, finding a quiet corner. "Yes, Dean Walsh, I can talk. We've completed our deliberations regarding the scholarship auditions. I wanted to inform you personally of the committee's decision." The pause felt eternal. Sarah held her breath, her entire future hanging in the balance. "Congratulations, Miss Mitchell. We are pleased to offer you a full scholarship to the Hamilton Conservatory. Your audition was exceptional, demonstrating both technical proficiency and artistic maturity. We believe you will be a valuable addition to our program." Sarah's knees went weak. She leaned against the wall for support, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. "Thank you so much." Dean Walsh continued with details about enrollment, class schedules, and orientation. Sarah barely heard the specifics. All that mattered was that impossible word, scholarship. Full scholarship. Her dream was real. After the call ended, Sarah stood in the quiet corner for several minutes, letting the news sink in. Then she called Lisa, who screamed so loud that people at the event turned to look. She called Professor Pemberton, who congratulated her warmly, and said he looked forward to teaching her next semester. She texted Victoria, who responded with multiple celebration emojis. Margaret Chen found Sarah shortly after, having noticed her step away during service. When Sarah explained what happened, Margaret hugged her tightly. "I'm so proud of you. You've worked incredibly hard for this. But finish your shift first," she added with a smile. "Professional until the end." Sarah laughed and returned to work, though she could barely focus. Her mind was already in the future, imagining herself as a conservatory student, studying with the best teachers, performing on real stages. That evening, there was a celebration at Sarah and Lisa's apartment. Professor Pemberton came, bringing a bottle of nice wine. Victoria and Marcus arrived with champagne and an enormous bouquet of flowers. Margaret Chen brought food from her catering company. Even Derek appeared, looking nervous but sincere. "I know I'm probably not welcome," Derek said to Sarah quietly, "but I wanted to congratulate you properly. What you've accomplished is remarkable." Sarah studied him for a moment. The arrogant man from the wedding was gone. In his place was someone who seemed genuinely humbled and changed. "Thank you for getting me to Dr. Morrison. That made a real difference." "It was the least I could do," Derek replied. "I learned something from you, Sarah. Talent and hard work matter more than money or status. I'm trying to be better, to actually earn respect instead of expecting it." As the party continued, Sarah stood by the window looking out at the city lights. Lisa came to stand beside her. "You did it," Lisa said simply. "Everything you dreamed about. It's happening." "I still can't believe it," Sarah admitted. "A few months ago I was just another waitress hoping for a break. Now I'm going to study at Hamilton Conservatory." "You were never just another waitress," Lisa corrected. "You were always a talented pianist who happened to work as a waitress. There's a difference." Professor Pemberton joined them at the window. "I want you to understand something, Sarah. Winning this scholarship is wonderful, but it's just the beginning. The conservatory will be challenging. You'll be surrounded by talented musicians who have trained their entire lives. There will be moments when you doubt yourself, when you feel like you don't belong." Sarah nodded, understanding the wisdom in his words. "But remember this moment," he continued. "Remember that you earned your place not through connections or money, but through talent and determination. Remember the wedding where you stood up for yourself and your art. Let that courage carry you through the difficult times ahead." The celebration lasted into the early hours of the morning. When everyone had finally left, Sarah and Lisa cleaned up the apartment together. "What's the first thing you're going to do as a conservatory student?" Lisa asked. Sarah thought about it. "Practice on a real grand piano whenever I want. No more cheap keyboard. No more sneaking into practice rooms. And after you graduate," Lisa prompted, "I want to perform. Real concerts, real audiences. But I also want to teach. I want to help other students like me, kids who have talent but not opportunity. I want to do what Professor Pemberton did for me." Lisa smiled. "You're going to be amazing." Over the next few weeks, Sarah prepared for her new life. Victoria and Marcus followed through on their promise, providing funding for a small apartment near the conservatory and a quality upright piano. It wasn't a grand, but it was a real piano with proper action and tone. Sarah cried when it was delivered to her new place. Derek also reached out with an unexpected offer. His family's foundation wanted to establish a scholarship program for talented students from low-income backgrounds. Would Sarah be willing to help design the program? She agreed, seeing it as a way to help others avoid the struggles she had faced. Margaret Chen hired another pianist for her catering company, but kept Sarah on as a consultant, helping to develop the musical entertainment service. It meant Sarah could earn money while focusing on her studies. The week before classes started, Sarah visited her old neighborhood. She knocked on a familiar door and Mrs. Rodriguez, her first piano teacher, answered. The elderly woman's eyes widened in recognition. "Sarah, mi niña, come in. Over tea, Sarah told Mrs. Rodriguez about everything that had happened. The wedding, the scholarship, the future she now faced. Her old teacher listened with tears in her eyes. "I always knew you were special," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "Even when you were 5 years old, barely able to reach the pedals, I could see your passion for music. I'm so proud of you." "I never forgot what you taught me," Sarah said. "You gave me the foundation for everything that came after. Thank you." Before she left, Sarah played one of Mrs. Rodriguez's old pianos, the same instrument where she had learned her first scales and simple melodies years ago. It sounded different than she remembered, smaller and less refined, but it was where her journey had begun. On the first day of classes at Hamilton Conservatory, Sarah walked through the halls with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Other students filled the corridors, most of them younger, many of them clearly from wealthy families based on their clothes and confidence. Sarah felt a moment of doubt. Did she really belong here? Then she remembered Derek's face at the wedding when she played Chopin. She remembered the standing ovation. She remembered Professor Pemberton saying she had earned her place through talent and determination. She belonged here not because someone had given her a gift, but because she had worked for it. Her first class was music theory with Professor Williams. The second was piano literature with Professor Pemberton. Her afternoon included chamber music ensemble and ear training. The schedule was intense, more demanding than anything she had experienced before. During lunch, Sarah sat alone in the conservatory cafeteria. She was reviewing her theory notes when someone sat down across from her. It was a young man about her age, Asian, with glasses and a friendly smile. "You're Sarah Mitchell, right? The scholarship student who played at that wedding?" Word had spread. Sarah nodded. "That's me. I'm James Chen, piano major, second year. I heard your story from Professor Pemberton. Pretty impressive. Mind if I sit?" "Please do." James became Sarah's first friend at the conservatory. Through him, she met other students, formed study groups, and joined practice sessions. She learned that many of her fellow students, despite their privileged backgrounds, faced their own struggles and insecurities. Some felt pressure from demanding parents. Others doubted their talent compared to their peers. A few admitted they felt like frauds, worried they didn't deserve to be there. Sarah realized that everyone struggled. Everyone doubted themselves sometimes. The difference was in how you responded to those doubts. You could let them stop you or you could push through them. Months passed. Sarah's playing improved dramatically under Professor Pemberton's teaching and the conservatory's rigorous training. She performed in student recitals, receiving positive feedback from faculty and peers. Her wrist healed completely, stronger than before. In the spring semester, Sarah gave her first major recital in the conservatory's concert hall. The performance included works by Mozart, Chopin, and Prokofiev. Professor Pemberton helped her prepare, refining every detail. The night of the recital, Sarah stood backstage in a simple black dress. She could hear the audience taking their seats. Through a gap in the curtain, she saw familiar faces. Lisa sat in the front row. Professor Pemberton was there, along with other faculty members. Victoria and Marcus had come bringing flowers.